After studying this module, you shall be able to learn the origins and relevance of Keynesian economics, explore the components of aggregate demand in an economy, understand the role of consumption and factors that determine consumption, learn the concept of gross private investment and the factors that determine it, learn the concept and impact of government purchases for goods and services, learn how net exports affect aggregate demand.
Why does the equilibrium output move away from the potential output? The fluctuation in output away from the potential output has attracted the attention of most macroeconomists. The model is based on the mutual interaction between spending and output. It is true that the level of spending in the economy will determine output and income, but at the same time the level of output and income also determines spending. To understand the relation between demand and output and working of business cycles, we developed the basic Keynesian model in this module. The Keynesian economics developed during the period of Great Depression of 1930s, when incomes, employment, demand were all very low. The classical economists believed in full employment and were unable to explain the flow of events at this time, nor were they able to remedy the enormous problems associated with Great Depression. The policy prescriptions to bring an economy out of depression were then explained and formulated by British economist John Maynard Keynes in his General Theory of Employment, Interest and Income, published in 1936. Keynes believed that the root of the problem was low level of aggregate demand in the economy. Hence, to elevate the economy out of depression, a boost in aggregate demand was required. He believed in expansionary fiscal policy measures, especially public work expenditure or government expenditure, to raise the level of aggregate demand, income and employment.
The Keynesian model is thus essentially a theory of aggregate demand. The present module attempts to introduce several components of aggregate demand in Keynesian model. This model is based on two assumptions. First, the prices are constant. The need for this assumption arises as Keynesian economics originated in the period of recession when resources were unutilized. Hence, beginning a new economic activity or increasing the level of already existing economic activities will use resources but without any consequent upward pressure on resource prices. Second, the aggregate supply curve is horizontal, implying that firms are able to sell any amount of output at the given prices. Also, firms have excess or unutilized capacity. So, any increase in demand leads to an expansion of output at the given price. So, an increase in government spending will result in much larger increase or multiple times in aggregate demand and output. The second assumption makes this model essentially a demand side model. One of the implications of the model is that an increase in government spending will result in much larger increase multiple times in aggregate demand. Let us move over to the concept of aggregate demand. The equilibrium condition in Keynesian model is that output should be equal to desired expenditure or aggregate demand. It is therefore important to understand the concept of aggregate demand in an economy. The aggregate demand AD is the total amount of goods that are demanded in an economy. There are four components of aggregate demand. Consumption C. This includes the final demand of goods by the consumers. Investment I. Investment demand function represents the demand for investment, new machines, factories, housing, etc. in an economy and is inversely related to the interest rates. Government purchases G. This consists of final demand of goods by the government sector. Net exports NX, which is total exports minus total imports. Expressing these in equation form, we get AD is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX, which is equation 1. For equilibrium, it is required that economy supplies output that is equal to what is demanded. That is, Y is equal to AD, equation 2. From equation 1 and 2, we get Y is equal to AD, which is equal to C plus I plus G plus NX, equation 3. When the economy is not in equilibrium state, that is, when aggregate demand is not equal to the output produced in the economy, then there is an addition or reduction in unplanned inventory stock, IU. For instance, if output is greater than the aggregate demand, then there is unplanned addition to inventory stock or inventory investment takes place. IU is greater than 0, as there are unsold goods lying in the factories. As firms start adding on to their inventories, they reduce production until the economy reaches back at the point where output is equal to aggregate demand, that is, Y is equal to AD. On the contrary, if output is less than the aggregate demand, that is, Y is less than AD, then there is unplanned reduction in the inventory stock or inventory disinvestment happens. IU is less than 0, as there is unmet demand in the economy which has to be met from past stock of goods. Now, firms realize that their inventories are going down and will increase production until equilibrium between Y and AD is restored. Now, we go on to discuss the components of aggregate demand in detail. Let us start by looking at consumption and saving functions. The living standards of a household or a nation could be inferred by analyzing their consumption levels. Therefore, several studies use consumption expenditure as a proxy for income levels. In fact, consumption expenditure accounts for a sizable proportion of aggregate demand in most economies in the recent years. To understand the relationship between consumption and income, let us examine the consumption function. Simply put, consumption function is the relationship between consumption and income in an economy, other things remaining the same. Symbolically, the consumption function can be written as C is equal to A plus BY, where A is greater than 0 and B is between 0 and 1. The intercept A is the level of consumption at 0 income levels. The slope coefficient B is the amount of increase in consumption with the unit increase in income. More realistically, the entire income cannot be consumed. In fact, a certain proportion of income is collected by government in the form of personal taxes. This, reduces the disposable income of the consumers, which is computed as income minus taxes. In such a case, the consumption function can be expressed as C is equal to A plus B by D. A greater than 0, B between 0 and 1, where YD is the disposable income that is computed as income minus taxes. C is equal to A plus B Y minus T. C is equal to A plus BY minus BT. C is equal to A plus BY minus BT. The intercept A minus BT is the level of consumption when income is 0. This is the consumption level the household would require to maintain its subsistence by either begging, borrowing, or stealing. The slope of the consumption function is B. For every $1 increase in income, the consumption increases by $B. B is referred to as the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. It should also be noted that for the household, consumption and saving decisions are based on disposable income. The disposable income is income less tax payments, that is, the income that is left for final disposal. Figure 1 presents the consumption function, demonstrating the relationship between consumption, which is the dependent variable, and disposable income, which is the independent variable. The consumption curve C shows that the consumption increases with income, assuming other things remaining constant. Both consumption and income here are adjusted for inflation, that is, are in the real terms. The aggregate level of consumption is the sum of consumption expenditures of all individuals in an economy. For the macroeconomic analysis, we look at aggregate consumption levels. It is also important for us to understand that current disposable income is not the only determinant of consumption expenditure. Other factors such as the rate of interest, future expected income, and wealth may be important determinants of a household's consumption decision. Nevertheless, Keynesian consumption function considered current disposable income to be the most important factor.
Marginal propensity to consume and save, both for an individual or a nation, closely related to consumption decision is the decision to save. In other words, the decision to consume and save is essentially an outcome of the same decision of spending current disposable income. The question of facing them is that if your disposable income increases by a certain amount, how is your consumption likely to respond? It is possible that you could spend the entire increased income on current consumption, or alternatively, you could spend the entire income in future, in which case you save the entire increase in income. But rather than these two extreme possibilities, it is far more likely that you would increase both current consumption and savings by some amount and desire to spend the remaining amount in future. The reason for such a behavior is simply that an individual would like to even out or spread out consumption spending over his lifetime rather than spending more in one period.
The fraction of incremental income that is spent is referred to as marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. This is measured by dividing change in consumption expenditure by change in income. Similarly, the proportion of additional income that is not consumed or saved is referred to as marginal propensity to save, or MPS. Symbolically, MPC is equal to delta C by delta Y. MPS is equal to delta S by delta Y. Let us understand this concept with the help of an example. For instance, if a country's income increases from $15 trillion to $16 trillion, then its consumption increases by $0.7 trillion and savings increase by $0.3 trillion. The marginal propensity to consume in this case will be change in consumption, that is $0.7 trillion divided by change in income, that is $1 trillion. So, MPC is 0.7 divided by 1, which is equal to 0.7. The marginal propensity to save is change in consumption, that is $0.3 trillion divided by change in income, again $1 trillion. Hence, MPS is 0.3 divided by 1, which is equal to 0.3. As the disposable income may be either consumed or saved, the marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save must be equal to 1. In the present example, 0.7 plus 0.3 is equal to 1. Thus, MPC plus MPS is equal to 1. As mentioned earlier, the slope of consumption function is marginal propensity to consume. It measures the change in consumption due to $1 change in income. As the rest of the income is saved, 1 minus B or 1 minus MPC is the proportion that is not spent. This is the same as marginal propensity to save. This could also be denoted by small s in the saving function. Since savings is income minus consumption, the savings function can be derived as S is equal to Y minus C. S is equal to Y minus A plus BY. This gives us S is equal to minus A plus Y minus BY, or S is equal to minus A plus 1 minus BY. That is, S is equal to minus A plus small s y. The savings is an increasing function of income as MPS is positive. Thus, savings increase as incomes increase. Further, at zero level of income, we have negative savings or dissavings. The savings curve is displayed in the figure. The negative intercept minus A indicates that the individual would dissave when his income is zero to survive. Apart from income, consumption and hence savings depend upon a number of factors such as price level, future expectations of price and income, interest rates, and net wealth. The theory of demand suggests that as price increases, the expenditure on the particular commodity is expected to decrease, and when the expectations of future prices increases, a consumer is expected to consume more today. The consumption of an individual who has little income today but expects to earn sizable amount at a later time period is expected to spend more relative to a person who does not expect to earn high in the future as well. An increase in interest rates makes current consumption expensive, thereby reducing current consumption expenditure. An increase in wealth of a consumer, an inheritance or sudden gain, is likely to increase current consumption and reduce current savings. However, these factors are not considered in the Keynesian consumption function, and consumption is primarily considered to be a function of income. Let us now understand the concept of average propensity to consume. The average propensity to consume is consumption divided by income y. That is, APC is equal to C upon Y, which is equal to A upon Y plus B. MPC is constant over time, but APC falls as income increases. Similarly, APS is savings divided by income, Y. That is, APS is equal to S upon Y, which is equal to minus A upon Y plus small s. Again, MPS is stable over time, but APS falls as income increases.
The second most important component of aggregate demand constitutes investment or gross private domestic investment. Investment expenditure includes those expenses that are incurred to enhance the productive capacity, such as on new buildings, factories, office equipments, new houses, or an addition to stock of inventories. It should be kept in mind that investments here does not include buying of financial assets such as shares, stocks and bonds. The demand for investment depends upon prevailing rate of interest in the market and expected rate of return. If the prevailing rates of interest are low relative to the expected rate of return from investments, the investment expenditure will rise. If the interest rates are high relative to the expected rate of return on investment, then investment expenditure will fall. The expenditure by government constitutes the third component of aggregate expenditure in an economy. The government expenditure ranges from expenses incurred on education, roads and infrastructure to defense. The foreign sector or the rest of the world also affects the aggregate expenditure through both imports and exports. When the domestic income increases, Indians spend more domestic goods as well as on imports from other nations. As domestic income increases, imports into the country increases. Net exports can be measured as exports minus imports. The net export function represents the relationship between net exports and income of the country. Let us now study all these components in detail.
Another concept is that of investment function. Investment or gross private domestic investment constitutes the second important component of aggregate demand. While Keynes considered consumption expenditure to be the most stable function of disposable income, the investment expenditure was the most volatile component, resulting in income instability. Investment expenditure includes those expenses that are incurred to enhance the productive capacity, such as on new buildings, factories, office equipments, new houses, or on addition to stock of inventories. It should be kept in mind that investment here does not include buying of financial assets such as shares, stocks, and bonds. The demand for investment depends upon prevailing interest rates in the market and expected rate of return. If the prevailing rates of interest are low relative to the expected rate of return from the investments, the investment expenditure will rise. If the interest rates are high relative to the expected rate of return on investment, then investment expenditure will fall. In this sense, the rates of interest are the opportunity cost of investing the funds. This indicates that investment demand is expected to be inversely related to rate of interest. In this respect, both Keynes and classical economists had similar view. Let us understand this concept with the help of a diagram. As we can see from the figure, the investment function describes the relationship between the investment expenditure and income in the economy. Since investment decision depends upon rates of interest. The simplest investment expenditure is assumed as autonomous, that is, one that is independent of income. An autonomous investment demand schedule, denoted by I bar, can be seen in the figure. Let us now learn the concept and impact of government purchases of goods and services. The expenditure by government constitutes the third component of aggregate expenditure in an economy. The government expenditure ranges from expenses incurred on education, roads, and infrastructure to defense. The government expenditure function specifies the relationship between government purchases and income in an economy, keeping other things constant. The incurring of such expenditure is more likely to depend on the needs of the economy rather than income. Hence, this expenditure is treated as autonomous. Thus, the government expenditure function G bar is similar to one exhibited in figure. Another component is transfer payments and taxes. The transfer payments, denoted by TR bar, are unilateral payments made by government in the form of various benefits and allowances, such as the social security benefits or unemployment allowance. The desirability of such payments is felt more during the times of depression and low incomes. Hence, the transfer payments are likely to be inversely related to income levels in an economy. Taxes, T bar, are an important component of government's sources of revenue. These are likely to be positively related to income levels. Taxes may be assumed as constant T naught or directly proportional to income Ty. Taxation reduces the disposable income of the consumers, reducing their consumption expenditures. Since taxes are positively related with income, while transfers are negatively related with income, it will be assumed initially that net taxes, that is, taxes minus transfers, are autonomous and independent of income. However, in the later module, more realistic assumptions will be made. Net exports. The foreign sector or the rest of the world also affects the aggregate expenditure through both imports and exports. When the domestic income increases, Indians spend more domestic goods as well as on imports from other nations. As domestic income increases, imports into the country increases. Though the aggregate expenditure increases, nevertheless these are leaked out of the flow of domestic income. What influences India's exports? India's exports would be dependent not on India's domestic income but on foreigners' income. Thus, India's exports would increase if incomes in countries demanding India's products increases. Net exports can be measured as exports minus imports. The net export function represents the relationship between net exports and income of the country. Our imports are dependent on our income, but exports are dependent on foreigners' income. So, net exports will be a function of domestic income and foreigners' income. For the time being, we assume that net exports are autonomous or independent of domestic income and denoted by NX bar. The next module will establish equilibrium condition in different models by relaxing several of these assumptions. Let us summarize what we learned in this module. The basic Keynesian model develops a model of income and aggregate expenditure. This model assumes that the prices are constant and aggregate supply curve is horizontal. Aggregate demand AD is the total amount of goods that are demanded in an economy. There are four components of aggregate demand: consumption C, investment I, government purchases G, and net exports NX. The consumption curve shows that consumption increases with income, assuming other things remaining constant. The marginal propensity to consume MPC is the fraction of incremental income that is spent. APC and APS fall as income increases. The proportion of additional income that is not consumed or saved is referred to as marginal propensity to save MPS. As the disposable income may be either consumed or saved, the marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save must be equal to 1. The demand for investment depends upon prevailing interest rates in the market. The investment function describes the relationship between the investment expenditure and income in the economy. The consumption expenditure is a stable function of income, while investment is the unstable component of income in Keynesian analysis. As investment decision depends upon rates of interest, the simplest investment expenditure is assumed as autonomous, that is, one that is independent of income. The government expenditure function specifies the relationship between government purchases and income in an economy, keeping all other things constant. This expenditure is treated as autonomous. Since taxes are positively related with income, while transfers are negatively related with income, it is assumed that net taxes, that is, taxes minus transfers, are autonomous and independent of income.